Hi, I'm Ginger Metro, and today we're going to be talking with on the New View with Helen Kubain. Helen is a Palestinian who is married to a Jew, uh, and she has unique perspectives on, as I would say, on what's going on with Israel, Gaza, etc. And so, welcome to the New View, Helen.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Okay, so do any of you want to have questions, or shall I begin with question?
Well, I'd like to hear what Helen, if she has some thoughts already with what she'd like to share. Helen, if you do, I'd like to kind of hear your story, your perspectives, and then we'll know how to continue from there.
Right.
Definitely.
An
Sure.
introduction
Yeah,
also.
so maybe I can give you just a really quick background of my family and my husband's family.
Good.
My father was born in what was Palestine in 1924, and he sort of lived through the end of the Ottoman Empire, the British colonial authority, and the creation of the State of Israel. So he kind of personally witnessed all of it. And actually immigrated to the U.S. in 1946 and attended all sessions in the United Nations on partitioning in Palestine and met the entire Palestinian delegation.
Wow.
Um, we're Christian. My Palestinian family is Christian. And at the time, the most prestigious school in the Middle East, my family's sort of upper middle class, and was the American school in Ramallah. And he attended there. So when he was in high school, he spent one summer reading all of Shakespeare's works and, had a lot of American teachers. So he sort of was in between the old world and this American world, not quite fitting in either place. But very educated, came to the United States, got a PhD in political science, and was a consultant for the CIA, the State Department, and Congress on Middle East affairs, trying to give sort of the Arab perspective. And my mother, who's an American, went to Harvard Graduate School in Middle East Studies. And so I had a very academic family living in Washington, D.C., where I was born. And so, involved in a lot of the think tanks and every day. So Palestinians, Arabs in general are obsessed with the news, and Palestinians in particular, you watch the news every day at dinner, you discuss what happened today in Jordan, or what US foreign policy did this, or what happened in Egypt. And Arabs in general are very critical of their leaders. So sort of growing up, we would at our nightly gathering at dinner, could easily criticize what Israel did that day or what the King of Jordan did that day. So very kind of news obsessed. And unfortunately, particularly being a Palestinian American, you're raised every day where you get your daily scoop of victimhood at dinner, and find out how we were screwed that day. And so you grow up in this environment where you're a victim. And of course, the news never had the Palestinian perspective growing up or the Arab perspective. So when you're always told, my parents always said, don't ever tell anybody you're Arab, don't discuss being Arab, don't discuss what's going on in Palestine. And so you're also growing up with this, like, you can never open your mouth, you can never say anything, which really creates a lot of rage and frustration. And then the few times that I would try and talk to friends about it, they're always just saying, oh, well, you're Palestinian, so you're biased, or you're Arab American, you're biased. And so your opinion and your viewpoint is immediately kind of thrown out. Now, Harry, my husband, he grew up in Pikesville, Maryland, which is a suburb of Baltimore. And it's one of the largest Jewish communities on the East Coast. So there's about 110,000 Jews. His public school, according to him, was 95 to 98% Jewish. His family was grew up poor. Nobody went to university for the most part, except then his father and two other brothers fought in World War II, and then on the GI Bill went and got university educated. And Harry's father became a self-made millionaire as a civil engineer, building roads and bridges for the city and the state in Maryland. And And what Harry's perspective is, they never talked about the Palestinians or what happened to the Palestinians. It sort of didn't occur to them, but he feels like they just there was no news and no information that was available to them. So he grew up in this sort of Jewish bubble where it was all about supporting Israel. You did your teen tour, when you were 16 years old and went over. And for Harry, it's very important that there is a Jewish state. It matters to him. He feels like there are Catholic states and there's Muslim states and there's other Christian states, and there should be a Jewish state. And particularly because the Jews have been persecuted. I thought the Holocaust was most on his mind, but from Harry's perspective, it's like, no, Jews have been persecuted for 2,000 years and they need their own country. And it needs to be Jewish, not shared with other people. But he also thinks the Palestinians deserve their own state. So needless to say, Harry and I got into a lot of arguments, and we still get into a lot of arguments, but we've sort of, over our 10-year relationship, have also learned how to talk about it. So I feel like the best thing I could share, if you're interested, is really, what are the landmines in talking about Palestine and Israel, and what works? Because I think that's kind of the knowledge I have to sort of share about my experience with Harry and I think overall we have a very loving relationship, and are committed to not letting this issue harm our relationship. But we do have arguments about it,
Wow, I mean, had you been recording it since you met him, it would be a fabulous book of your conversations, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it's not too late. Continue on. Wow. Very interesting.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't know if you have specific questions, or if you want me to talk a little bit about kind of what are the pitfalls and what works, or what would you like?
Where do you and Harry agree? I mean, all these years of conversations, where are you now in your dialogue with Palestine, Israel?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things here, like that's always been there is, Harry does agree that the Palestinians should have their own state. He doesn't want he would prefer not to have Palestinians kind of co-running an Israel. He wants there to be a Jewish state. And so I think he would like there to be, like, the West Bank. The Palestinians should have the West Bank. They should be able to govern it. And the Jews, the Israelis, should leave and, go cross the Green Line and go back into Israel proper. I'm not that religiously based, me personally. So I think that the Jews and the Israelis and the Palestinians can cohabitate. So, if there was one kind of, I think there's like going to end up being a federation. I don't think Israel will ever allow the Palestinians to govern their own borders, to run their own borders. And so I think there is going to be, I think they effectively are one state. Whether that's the best solution or not, I think Israel has taken more than 80% of the West Bank. So, and if you look at, like, my family growing up, they had Jewish neighbors and they got along just fine. My family's Christian. We're not Muslim. We get along fine living in Muslim majority countries. Or I still have cousins that live in Nazareth in our family home that's like 300 years old, and they have Israeli citizenship. It's an uncomfortable thing in Israel being second-class citizens, but they'd rather live under the Israeli rule. I don't know if that's still true today, but it would have been true 2 years ago, than living under the Palestinian Authority. They think the Israeli government's is better run than the Palestinian Authority governed the West Bank. So I just think there's, having watched my Arab family be fine being Christians in Jordan, Christians in Syria, Christians in Israel, and then and listening to my family's experiences, for the last 100 years of which we have experience, I just think it's not a problem to live together and to govern together. So I don't have that need that Harry has for having a Jewish state and a Palestinian state, and they're kind of separate.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that Harry grew up with a Zionist leaning then? Is that idea about I want an Israel to be its own Jewish state? Do you think that's a Zionist thing, or do you think that's common amongst Jews in general?
Well, I think Harry grew up in this community that's very proud to be Jewish, and he loves being culturally Jewish. Harry's not even sure there's a God. And so for him, I think there's a lot of Jews who are really secular, and for them, it's more of a cultural identity. And so I think Harry's very proud of um, that identity and that culture. I think also he did grow up in this community that feels like the world is unsafe for Jews, and they do need um, their own place to go to if their world ever becomes unsafe. So I think there's really two things. I think there's this pride and pride in being Jewish, and there, because the world has plenty of Catholic countries and has plenty of Protestant countries and has plenty of Muslim countries. There should be at least one Jewish country. And this sense of, Harry's always said if there's always he'll never live he's never professed any interest in living in Israel, but he likes the idea that there's a place. If the world becomes unsafe, he has a place to go to. And Jews have a place to go to, and he feels like France right now. He feels that for the past few years, France is increasingly unsafe. And it's important that I think Harry would say it's important that those French Jews have Israel to go to be safe. Although, is Israel really safe the way it is right now? I would say no, but okay, that's and I think growing up, Harry's the community just never even thought about the Palestinians. They didn't talk about it. They didn't wonder, well, what happened to these people? It was nobody was there. And so there was nobody there, and it was empty land. And I mean, I remember the first time I talked to Harry's younger brother, it took them 3 years to kind of build up the courage, I think, to have a conversation with me. And then he just said, well, tell me about your family background. And I started telling him about my family background. And he said, but and I explained my family's from Nazareth. We've been from Nazareth for hundreds of years. Our current home is like 300 years old. It's a 3-minute walk from Mary's well, where God tells Mary she's going to have a baby, and you just go up the hill and there's our, and he was like, but where's your family from before that? And I'm like, well, there. And it was this big loop. And he asked me like 5 times. And then I just switched the conversation, because he really couldn't believe that we have been living in Israel, in what's current day Israel, for like 300 years. He assumed we had to have been from somewhere else. I think they don't talk about it. And they talk about this myth that nobody was living over there. And I think that when you're in this Jewish bubble and you've been raised with that, there was his brother was not being nasty. He was just, but where, it was
that's the propaganda. That's what was taught over and over again. It's a land with no people for a people with no land. Right. And that was repetitively drilled as that's the story. But that story that there's no people there is the same story that happened with the Native Americans. This whole continent was declared terra nullius, vacant land, because Native Americans were not considered to be humans, fully human. They were considered like wild animals. They're subhuman. So this was vacant land. And so that is an imperial mindset that's fed to the people, that they invite the people to come and colonize territory that the elites want to control. So the elites want more people from their country in that land that they ultimately intend to control everybody in it. Mm-hmm. So now we look at, who's really behind the Zionist plan here. And we know the story. You need safety, Holocaust, pogroms, centuries and centuries of persecution, but it may well be that elites were using the Jews as scapegoats over and over again to create conflict, to deflect from what the elites were doing that was unjust. So it became like the major scapegoat because they were such a Jewish are such a strong minority. Because the culture is strong and it's an integrated culture, it's an easy target because you can say, well, look, that's a Jewish person, and you can tell because that's what they do. That's their religion. That's their culture. So I think that the Jewish people became an easy scapegoat. I know that happened under Roman imperialism. It happened just so many times. So we see the same story here, acting out. End your conversation with your husband. The same century old stories being told. And it said that he who controls the narrative controls the world. So I think what we got to do is get another narrative out there that's bright and clear and appealing.
Right.
Yeah, I have a question about your husband and what his attitude is towards these are facts that if I am misstating it, certainly tell me, but a majority of the Jews in Israel are not Semites. And that we all know what that means, okay? That we're dealing with Jews that were never directly connected to the land of Israel. And that kind of screams, I think, what Alana's setting up when you get into some of those realities. And I think you said it yourself, your own personal experience was there was coexistence with no problem, okay, before the entire region was targeted by the British Empire, obviously, really actively starting in, the 20th century, but the movement itself really goes back many, many, many centuries into the growth of the Zionist idea and the return of the Jews to Israel, and also its connection to Christian Zionism, which really does seem to play a far more powerful role in this very negative outcome that has happened to the Palestinian people. So it isn't even just the Jews who are really responsible for this. So again, I didn't know if these are the types of things that you might have touched with your husband and what he would feel about, as you said about, your relatives' difficulty in realizing that they conceptually did not understand there were people there, but that their own people are not the people who ever were there in the first place. I don't understand how that's reconciled.
Well, so Harry thinks that all Jews hail from Israel. And so it is, even though his family is from Lithuania or Latvia and Poland, he considers them to have 100% connection and 100% right to the land there. And so one of the things if you're Arab is you're like the Israelis have even stolen hummus, and we joke about that, right? Like that they've taken our food. I mean, nobody from Latvia ever had hummus, right? They their bagels and their whitefish and whatever. And now he considers, but he genuinely does. He thinks falafel and hummus is Jewish food. Okay, food.
Yeah.
And
funny.
and I've had many an argument with Harry over hummus.
Wow.
I don't argue with him about hummus anymore, but we used to, I've given it up. But so I think there is this sense of any Jew is directly connected, is a direct descendant and has a direct birthright to the land, even if you're European and you've been European for, 1,000 years.
Now I'm thinking of where we've gone with our science, of our genetics, of our DNA. So we can trace where we're from back a long time through the DNA analysis, right?
Yeah, for
so
real.
That should be able to prove the case. You
Yeah,
know, if you're from
exactly.
Lithuania, but you don't have any bloodline, it looks like, back into Palestine, Israel, that
Yeah,
should settle the case.
yeah.
So I gave him for his birthday because his family, on both his mother and father's sides, never his grandparents did not talk about where they were from, and so he actually didn't. He doesn't know his family's backstory for the
Wow.
most of it.
Uh-huh.
And so I gave him a DNA test for his birthday early on when we were dating, and he's European. He's, you know, he's from Latvia and Lithuania, but that doesn't matter. He still feels
Ah,
that he is a
Well,
direct descendant.
that you,
Oh,
do
isn't
you,
that
do you think that the
interesting?
direct descendant thing idea
Oh
is
my.
Israel is back in Moses' time, that God gave them Israel,
Right.
uh, and but that's kind of far back. You don't really get good genetic tests to go that far back, right? So,
Back to Moses, you mean? You mean he's probably
yeah,
from Moses' tribe and
Right.
you can't
That's
trace
right.
it.
right.
Oh, so you
but
could
you
keep.
could go back to Israel, to the land, Palestine, though, even though you may not be able to go back 5,000 years and more, you certainly can go back
You'd
2,000
think
years.
there'd be traces, don't you?
Right. Yeah. I mean,
But
Paul
now
had,
we're dealing with cognitive dissonance here. Her
yeah,
husband
Yeah.
cannot change the narrative no matter what
yeah,
logical
yeah,
reasoning, what science DNA test. He is totally
yeah.
believing what he believes. And maybe that's what we are really up against in this world, because we're all in our relationships microcosms of the big world of that ultimately blows up into these huge conflicts, right? So safety is a key, and I think safety is what all human beings want. And so I
And
think
they
that
want to belong. That's one of the basic needs,
belongingness.
Yeah.
belonging.
Yeah. I
So they
mean, he,
want to know where they belong.
well, and
Well,
I do think there is this, like I said before, there's this wonderful pride in being Jewish and wanting that out there in the world. And I think when, when he was a kid, there wasn't this obsession with Israel, but I think kind of starting in the 70s, there was more of a tie between being American Jew and his connection to Israel. When you look at some of his, like one of his nieces, his niece cannot, um, can't separate being an American Jew and being an Israeli. Like for her, it's a tied entity, and I think for a lot of the younger American Jews, that it is a connected, united thing. And so, if Israel, for example, is threatened, she feels threatened. She
Mhm.
feels unsafe in America if Israel is threatened in Israel.
Yeah, I want to make a quick point though, when you bring up the fact that you noticed this happening in the 70s. That's a very important time period because that's when the Carter administration was turning the whole issue of emigration of Jews from the Soviet Union to Israel into a big issue as a way to kind of step up, the
bad Russia, bad
right.
Soviets,
And
right?
so this is where it became politicized in a way that it had not been yet.
Hmm.
Okay. And that there were people within the neocon. I don't know if everyone here, is aware of what neocons are, but these are the ones who basically have a war agenda. Okay. Or every war that we have gotten into, certainly since I mean, since the Vietnam War, let's just start with that one. We don't want to go back further than that right now. Okay. Is really connected to warmongers who really have been well known. And the part of their agenda became the Jewish emigration from the Soviet Union for the Soviet Union to prove that they were honoring the human rights according to the standard the United States set. And, so at some point, it would appear that, in fact, I think I remember hearing that there have been issues about how many Russian Jews, I think, are in Israel, that there is a huge population of Russian Jews. And that was part of the reason because of this whole push for the immigration. So, and again, so you've got these political issues pouring into this, and one does not always know where the true danger that might exist for a Jew in these situations really, is motivated directly about the Jewish people who are living there themselves. The politics really got very politicized long ago on that. And so my question to you, again, in terms of your husband's position, because he clearly is the one who is carrying a lot of these ideals about the Jews' reason for having the right to the land of Israel, the Palestine, okay, and where that comes from and how that became a claim. Now, I have listened to many of the Orthodox Jewish stories about those Jews who don't believe in Zionism at all, and in fact claim that the Jews are supposed to be homeless. That actually is the true purpose of being Jewish, to be homeless because they disregarded the laws of God and they made terrible mistakes, and that's part of the price they had to accept paying. And though I forget, there's a group in Israel that's very well known.
Right.
Neturei Karta.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I haven't been in touch with that name in a while, but I remember years
Say it
ago.
again. Say it
So
again.
could you say it again, because I didn't hear
I
it.
didn't get
Everybody
it.
was talking at once.
Neturei Karta.
Yeah, Neturei
And
Karta.
I mean, they're in the US too. They're at every
Yeah, yeah.
demonstration.
They're not the same
every,
as Hasidic. They're not.
well, they are also, but
They're
Hasidic.
Orthodox. They
they're
are
at every
Orthodox.
Palestinian
Orthodox.
rights
But
march.
they are anti-Zionist. They are
Yes, yeah.
actively anti, and they believe
Yeah,
it
they
is
don't want a
against
Jewish state. They
Jewish,
think it's
it
wrong.
is against the fate of the Jews
Right.
to have a homeland, and it undermines the actual purpose of being Jewish. So you can see within this idea of Judaism, you have substratas of arguments that never come to the surface at all. And in fact, actually, I think I remember hearing about the Neturei Karta. It was during when the president of Iran had hosted some kind of Holocaust event, and they were the ones who were invited. I believe it might have been in the 1980s or something like that. Not, I don't remember. It may not have been that far ago, but it was so downplayed. I happened to catch it, and it's like, oh my God, but who are these? Who are these
Put the
anti-Zionists?
spelling in chat, somebody, because even though I'm familiar with this viewpoint, I have not heard the name of these people before described in this. Somebody put it in the chat, okay? So
All right.
Sheila's
you-
gonna put it in
yeah.
chat.
I think the thing is, this conflict is not going to end based on convincing one side or another, and all of a sudden somebody's going to get this grand inspiration. They've been wrong for thousands of years or hundreds of years. And I think on the Palestinian side, for example, I think that there's a lot of Palestinians, particularly the older Palestinians, also from our history, there's always been these people who have come in from the outside and taken over. So, before the British, you had the Ottoman Empire ruled for 500 years. And before that, you had there's an Egyptian dynasty that ruled. And you've got the Crusaders that were in there. And so, on the Palestinian side, because everybody's not, they're not pure and pristine either. Like, first of all, they're very corrupt. The Palestinian Authority is crazy corrupt. But the Palestinians, they kind of believe that if they just hold out long enough, that this latest band of colonialists will just go away. And so they don't really have to deal with them. I'm not saying all Palestinians feel this way, but I think there is also like that general, that there is a common thought that at some point, a lot of Palestinians kept the keys from the homes that they were thrown out of in 1948. They still have the key to their house, and they think it's still there. They think they're going to go back when these colonialists just kind of get tired and go away. And so I think this is about, moving forward and not trying to convince people they're wrong, but I think it's mapping out a different kind of future for everyone so
Well,
that everybody has a wonderful, that the Palestinian and Israeli children have a safe
yeah.
home and a good education and a good healthcare system and can grow up and get a good job. And, I think
Well,
that's
let's
where,
keep along those lines, envisioning the future that we can help create. But Diane has her hand up. She hasn't said much so far. She's down in Washington.
Yeah, hi, I'm in DC also, and I'm Jewish. My grandparents are from Lithuania and Poland, so maybe I'm related to Harry.
there you go.
Uh, I'm 97% Ashkenazi, and I don't feel especially proud to be a Jew. I feel more it's a specific responsibility that I have. But let's see, I spent my junior year at Hebrew University. Afterwards, I went to visit Dachau. Then I went to the Soviet Union to visit refuseniks, and I was expelled from the Soviet Union when I was 21. And I was
Well,
also,
there's a badge of honor for you.
Yeah.
and I was in Israel and my ex-husband, his family are prominent and also infamous in Israel. They made Aliyah. And so I was there like in the early 90s when Russians were starting to come into the absorption centers, and also Ethiopians. And so, we went to visit them and get them clothes and stuff like that. So, let me see, I have a lot of different things I wanted to say. I'm going to turn my phone off.
I want to know why she was expelled from the USSR.
For distributing anti-Soviet literature.
Ah, well, that'll do it.
Yeah, yay.
Which means like Russian history, Jewish history written in Russian, so we got books from in Israel. So I was very poorly prepared. But a few things I want to say. One is in terms of the one state and two state solution, they're both simplistic and problematic. And there are people that totally believe, well, one is people who've spent, decades fighting for two-state solution, including Ian Lustig, who we interviewed. And many people I know who like were really all, and including like Naomi Chazan, anyway, people, Israeli officials, that it's been pretty much destroyed. And he said there's a one-state reality. And so people like in the US, a lot of people believe one state solution, and especially like Palestinian rights people and activists. And other people believe in freak out at the idea, they totally freak out at the idea of one state because it won't be a Jewish democracy. And they want a two-state solution, and people totally freak out about a two-state solution. So we've talked about this. Johann Galtung has a six-state solution. And I think probably the most deeply thought out project is A Land for All. And they've really have a lot of experts and thinking very, very, very deeply about an arrangement where you can have like residency in one place, but citizenship in another and joint institutions. So that's that. The other thing is that Israel is no longer recognizable as whatever it was, ever we believed it was, when we were growing up. And people are leaving. And even I just read something, I'm not finished it, by Gershon Baskin is like asking himself, when is it enough to leave? He was the negotiator for the release of Gilad Shalit. And he's more than any other Israeli, he's negotiated with Hamas for and I interviewed him in 1996 and, other people from the peace movement. And I'm pretty involved in DC and elsewhere. I've been involved with Tikkun, J Street, JV, Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now, New Israel Fund, Partners for Progressive Israel, and also in the field of conflict, been dealing with the conflict itself. And just I want to make like one comment about the rights to the land, the Jewish rights to the land. And actually, this came up when we were discussing Naomi Wolf, like maybe over a year ago, that she was accused of being a Zionist, and that wasn't what she says. And so basically the conclusion is that if Jews are ethical, they're entitled to live in the land, but it's not they're not the only ones entitled to live in the land. And here's a quote from Jeremiah, which is actually from a handout of a session my daughter-in-law did. It says, "No, if you really mend your ways and your actions, if you execute justice between one party and another, if you do not oppress the stranger, the orphan, and the widow, if you do not shed blood of the innocent in this place, if you do not follow other gods to your own hurt, then only will I let you dwell in this place, in the land that I gave your ancestors for all times." So it means they have a right to live in the land, but they don't have an exclusive right to live in the land. Palestinians also have a right. And people think, 600,000 Jews, I think, were at the Mount Sinai when Moses got the Torah. So they, were allegedly all descended from that. But anyway, and also that you're talking about the early Jew anti-Zionists. So like Albert Einstein, Hannah Arendt, Martin Buber, Ahad Ha'am, that they all came, there are many Jews that came over and they got along fine with the Palestinian citizens. And some of them brought money and they worked together. They didn't have a problem. It was only when Jews started dispossessing them and doing the Nakba. So many of them left and that were all for coexistence. And there could have been coexistence. And the other thing is that just one last point, that the whole problem is from European anti-Jew hatred, European Jew hatred, and that the Europeans and the Balfour Declaration, they didn't want Jews that were coming out of the Holocaust. They didn't want them coming to like London and England. They didn't want them flooding Europe. They wanted and even the rich Jews didn't want those poor Jews. So they wanted a state where they could send all the Jews. And the idea of a being safe place is that it's really a failure, that it should be safe for Jews to live in Europe. Jews shouldn't need to have a state. So some thoughts.
Thank you. A lot of stuff to think about there.
Mm.
Yeah, I do think that the key is this thinking about the future and thinking about the human dignity of everybody. And I think if people just focus on that and not try and resolve who did what when, I think once you start talking about the history and the facts, it just becomes it becomes so mucky and slimy, and you're never going to agree on who started what when. Harry would say that that the Jews were peaceful when they went to Palestine and the Palestinians tried to hurt them and they had to get militant. I would say the Palestinians accepted them, and then at some point the Jews started, and it's a never-ending argument. And it doesn't even, and I actually don't think it matters who started what when. I think we have to think about what, focusing on the fact that it's tragic what's happening and that it's not right for anybody. The first time I went over to Israel, to Jerusalem, when it was actually still Palestinian, but the Israelis had control. There used to be this old park in the old city of Jerusalem in the Jewish quarter. It's grass and trees, it's hundreds or maybe 1,000 years old. And the Israelis have since turned it into a parking lot. It's tragic, but anyway.
No.
I know, it's terrible. But anyways, there was this young Israeli couple. They were probably about 18 years old, and they had cut off jean shorts and tank tops. And they're wandering around the park, and they sit down and they make a place to, they sit down and they start kissing and necking and making out. And then they get up and they wander around to sit under another tree where they just start kissing, necking, making out again. And, both of them had their machine guns with them. I mean, like I just because Like, that is not what 18-year-olds should be experiencing. When you are on military duty, you're never allowed to leave your machine gun, even when it's the weekend or you have a day off. And I don't want this for these Israeli children, and I don't want for Palestinian children to be shot at just trying to go to school, or, you know, trying to cross a border and maybe getting arrested. And so I think that, you know, even though the Israelis, I think, feel like they have the upper hand and they're in military control, I don't think they are. I don't think they're, you know, they're creating a life where, you know, when you're 18 years old, you're being asked to torture other people. You're asked to shoot at other people. I think this has a long-term effect. And so, you know, the Palestinians, of course, absolutely know that they don't want their children growing up like this. I don't think the Israelis know that as much. I don't think it's life is normal to grow up with a machine gun. And so I think that we just have to get to a place where we say the future is a future where our children feel safe, feel at home wherever they are. They feel that their future is one where, you know, they could have a job working as an artist in a movie company, or they could have a job being a university professor. And I think when we put that as the goal where we all want to get to for everyone, we don't then have to worry about who's right or who's wrong, who did what to whom when. And that's where, like, Harry and I don't argue. We have no arguments about that at all. And you know, I want that kind of future for Israeli kids and Palestinian kids. He wants the same thing for Israeli kids and Palestinian kids. Mm-hmm. And so I think we just we don't need to if you can focus on the future, you end up having a very positive conversation and you don't waste as much time.
Okay. I don't see how, I mean, have you been seeing what's going on in Gaza and the forced starvation in the Gaza community? And the whole world is being forced to witness helplessly while Israel is doing this. I don't see, you can't make nice, we're going to need to have like truth commissions and tribunals and processes, and Israel's going to have to come to terms with this. After
what is Israel, Diane? This is a question. And when I hear people name a nation state, okay,
right
now it's Israel. I want to go deeper. What is behind
US.
the force behind Israel? What's the force behind the United States that has these endless wars?
Right.
We got to go deeper than, you know, it's a nation state thing. We really do. We
Agreed,
really have to
agreed.
go way deeper. And I think that Helen just laid out the basics of we are all human beings. And we all
Yeah.
want to be treated fairly and respectfully. And we want a safe and productive and beautiful life. She just laid it out. And you cannot get away from the land problem.
Mm-hmm.
There is still, how do we fairly share this earth? Because we want a world where no matter where we live, no matter what is our cultural, ethnic, racial identity, we all feel safe because we feel we belong. There's the belongingness issue. We belong to this planet that is owned and controlled by a few. It's a planetary issue. The Middle East is a microcosm. It's a microcosm of the poverty in Washington, D.C., where you live, Diane. It's a microcosm of what we're looking at with the poor neighborhoods in Baltimore. It's a microcosm of the homelessness in California, our eighth wealthiest, if it was a country, the eighth wealthiest in the world, has massive homelessness. We cannot separate these dynamics that we see out there in the Middle East, which is a fishbowl of the world problem. And the world problem is right. I'm going to get involved. Finally, I found somebody I can work with to deal with homelessness in my community. And I want to form a community land trust with a beautiful eco village of tiny houses like they have in Oregon, the green emerald village there. And I worked to get the tax shift for all the boroughs as an option in Pennsylvania. I worked legislatively. It passed the state legislature that bill with only one abstention, unanimous, so we can work for the big picture change of earth rights, public finance, and we can work to address these serious human needs right where we live. But when we connect the dots, you're going to help homeless in your community. That's not separate from killing people in Gaza. It's a matter of degree. A society, a
And it's
world that,
something that's on a scale that is a scale that's workable, because when you're looking at the large scale, somehow or another, I don't know how Israel, as a political force or as a governmental entity with Netanyahu heading it up and all that, I don't know how in the world they get special treatment around the whole world, that
yeah,
nobody can say anything against them. Nobody can object to what they do.
or if they do,
Everybody is supposed to support them, and so on, unconditionally. It's kind of like the mythology of vaccines. You never can, question a vaccine. Oh gosh,
but
vaccines.
Ginger, that's not
But
true. What you,
somewhere there's somebody on the top or something
yeah, that's right.
saying,
Because what,
no, no, you cannot object to Israel. Israel has first dibs on everything.
And Israel
and
and
what you
US
said,
are inseparable. I mean, yeah, and what are you trying to say?
I think she's frozen.
Yeah.
Lana, there you go.
Well, Diane, what did you just say before you turned us over to Alana? I didn't get.
Well, well, Alana, what you were mentioning about it's deeper than this. And you sent out a message today, maybe about this woman, like who controls the world. Like there is something deeper than this, but one is US and Israel are one and the same. Oh, the other thing I want to say is that it was after the 6-Day War that the US saw like Israel's military power and got really interested in Israel as a military base. And there's also a question about whether US is using Israel or whether Israel's using the US. I think the Christian Zionists are obviously they want Armageddon to happen so they can have the rapture. And for that, they need a certain amount of
yeah, an
Jews
insane narrative, and who
to come
supports
to
this
Israel.
insane
And
narrative?
Mike Huckabee is there, and
He was concerned though
believe that.
about a Christian village that was being damaged by the Israelis.
Right, they bombed
Well,
the
at least,
Catholic Church, the one that the Pope was calling.
yeah,
So, and I also have I mean, as a Jew, like years ago when like Congress members started talking about Israel, 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 I felt really creepy. Like it made me feel incredibly uncomfortable the way they were talking about Israel. And
Mm,
I discussed this with you again, but I'll mention it again now that it's not like, the Irish have Ireland or the Italians have it, or, African Americans have Nigeria, that Israel has like an archetypal dimension to it.
yeah.
Everyone grows up like from birth when you're baptized, like Jews, Christians, you grow up with like Israel. And I heard an interview, I guess with Tucker Carlson, and he was saying, as you bless Israel, you will be blessed. As you curse Israel, you would be cursed.
Oh boy.
Israel is not a country. It's like God. It's life and death. It's heaven and hell. It's like everything. It's not a normal country. And then it's also overdetermined because of their military might and their location, and there are, aircraft carrier and, our military base in the Middle East. And I mean, it's very overdetermined with lots of layers to it. But I think fundamentally it's like this primitive archetypal deep God thing. So,
but this archetype needs to become clearly conscious, and the archetype doesn't mean that anybody accepts people killing other people. There's something called "Thou shalt not kill" in the Abrahamic faiths, and I think worldwide. It's pretty basic. You're not supposed to murder other people. I mean, what
Christian
Helen said
Zionists are
about this
probably very
this
happy to
couple
get
in
are
love,
happy.
they're kissing on the benches in a beautiful park, and they're carrying their machine guns. What could be more obscene than a culture, a world that that allows that kind of scene to happen, you know? So it's a world problem for us people to solve. And right now, United States people have never had any control or say so in US foreign policy. We've never been invited. There's never been forums. They don't care because it was set up so that elites controlled US foreign policy, the elites that control the governing structures and aspire to control the world because that's what they do. That's their distorted, nefarious mindset is world control. And they play this like a game of dominoes or chess all over the world, and they get some kind of satisfaction and happiness from their game. But the
Who's
game
they?
is
Who's they?
You
neocons.
define
I mean,
those.
you can call them neocons. Liz brought up how the neocons have taken control. But even before the neocons arose, we had the Spanish American War that Mark Twain, they were the anti imperialist league at the end of the 1800s against the Spanish American War. Boy, the Philippines thought they were being liberated from Spain, and the American Empire took over the Philippines. Now, I just was talking to wonderful Filipino colleague Charles Avila, who wrote the book Ownership Early Christian Teaching, showing the original Judeo Christian, hence Islamic, because I've looked Islamic too, basic rights of property and how it gets distorted. So listen, he's very well known in Philippines and around the world. He was on the tarmac when Aquino was assassinated, when Aquino was running against Marcos years ago. Charles is very well known. He was a mayor of a city there. Now, this is interesting. The president and the vice president, and I might have them mixed up, but one leans China, the other leans United States. So you got an imperialistic
Uh-oh.
battle happening in the Philippines. Military leaders, and I mean generals, top, are coming to Charles and they're saying, listen, Charles, we don't want to die for empire wars anymore. Voila,
Yay.
voila. Military people awakening. What the heck am I out there killing for? Aligned with values oriented intellectuals, and I put us in that category because we're not military. But it's that conversation, it's that amalgam, it's that synergy of these military that have power, that don't want to fight and kill for stupid empire, with people who can show a better way. And that's where the values, non sold out, values oriented
So
intellectuals.
where are these people?
I was talking about Charles.
Where are these people and how can they be organized?
Well, you have Veterans for Peace. I mean,
Yeah.
where are these people? You mean to build this movement?
Yeah.
I would like us to invite military people in our conversations, our new view. We had Colleen Rowley. She would be in that category. Well, she was FBI, wasn't she? But I would like us to have as high a level military people in conversation with us because there are Veterans for Peace movements and there's people that have clarity about the way forward, the vision, values, and policies. That conversation and that alliance is what will shift out of this very nefarious world control psychology. And the reason I was going to say about Ginger, you said everybody this and that. I said that's not true, really, because if you look at the votes at the United Nations Security Council, they're all against this thing that's happening there. It's just that the Security Council is based, you got to have a unanimous vote. And Israel and the United States always vote against everybody else, and they have the power at the UN. But you have the UN General Assembly. Each nation state, 190, have a representative. They are consistently speaking against this genocide in Gaza.
There is a Palestinian Israeli Combatants for Peace group that is growing. That I think is a very powerful group, and they're growing in numbers. And
Yay.
they would be great, Alana, to be part of your.
Helen, we had Hillel, Shanker, with us 3 times, and you can listen to him online. They're all posted. The only Palestine Israeli journal, he co-edits with a Palestinian. These are 15 Palestinians and 15 Israelis, totally in good dialogue and publishing articles, and that has been an award-winning journal. And but know that we've been, with the leader of this, but the one that you're mentioning, yes, please, we'd love to, direct us to these conversations.
I think that what is going on here is actually bigger than what's happening in Israel. I think what we're dealing with is the whole function of war itself as an expression
Yes.
that has been really accepted. And there, I always suspected that mutual assured destruction was not going to stop nuclear war. And I think that we're now finally at the point where a lot of very smart intellectuals who have been pushing the agenda that there was this, like common sense men know all going to honor that code. And they're now being pushed to the side and told, like Jeffrey Sachs, as an example, he's being forced to have to confront the fact that there really are, quote, reasonable men who have crossed the line and actually want to push that agenda. So what we're really coming to is having to rethink the very idea of war itself and what it is and how it's gotten us to this place, but how much more of it can we use and actually really avoid the ultimate, someone's going to blow up the world. We can all see that is possible now. There's no doubt in my mind. And so it's like when you look at the difference between the human world and the animal world, we all know we're basically of the animal world. And when you look at the animal world, I've heard people use this argument that, well, animals fight to the death and do this and that, but animals did not with what they can do not sit down and create weapons of mass destruction that can destroy the entire earth very quickly. That's the difference. So we have a responsibility to somehow move beyond this particular stage of being part of the animal kingdom. And we have to figure out how to get more people. And I do think, especially I think with what you're talking about, where these dialogues are going on full force, of course, because of the Israeli situation and the shock, as Diane has pointed out, of us witnessing in real time these atrocities that have been going on, for hundreds at this point, for at least 100 years in this country, where atrocities have taken place, but they were not viewed in real time. When you go back to World War I and world major wars. So, but I guess there's a point, the point I feel we might want to bring into this is the realization that it is cracking through. The consciousness is cracking through, and that it's about being able to sort of capture, someone who's just cracked through with a thought or an idea that actually, begins to open up a new door of possibility. And, that's obviously, what we're here talking about. But I believe that in getting people to separate from the fear and it's that, you're either, once you're afraid, it's flight or fear, you either run or you, you're in this, right, exactly. And you're in this endless battle and you're saying, well, we don't have to live that way. In fact, that we saw in the 1960s and 70s, there was a report called the Iron Mountain, which actually was trying to look at the possibility of a world without war. And if you look at this document that ultimately was produced from all kinds of government officials, and I think it was completed in the 70s, you look at this report and you can see they actually literally could barely conceive of a world without war. They weren't ready for that yet. They
didn't think that it was economically feasible.
Exactly. They needed war to have
they needed slaves or cheap labor or something.
Exactly. So, but we're now in 2025, and I think we're ready. I think we can actually think differently now than they did in the 1960s and 70s about that.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah. The key is to being able to actually get it out there into media, which is so, by,
Well, it's
bribery and money and all sorts of influences to absolutely not just
yeah.
treat it as a non-issue, not even pay attention to it, censor it, whatever it is, and how many people don't realize how their information channel is so restricted to that, like that Overton window,
Even people in alternate media and social media, I don't find much clarity. I just find ad nauseum what's happening, ain't it awful? I don't find much clarity. I mean, if you're on the right, you're on the left, you're divided. I don't see the purple zone hardly coming through at all. But the abolition of war, that's been a long time movement too. And it was a big deal to abolish slavery. And you know
Oh, do
how
you
that
do you remember back there decades ago, while growing up, that the family would sit down and we'd watch the news, and we trusted these news people, you know, and there are people still in that
Oh,
headspace.
yeah.
not younger people,
Right.
older people that are dying
Just
Yeah, I'd say
trust
the young,
mainstream media. Every few months, fewer are paying any attention to mainstream media. That's
yeah.
what's coming in
That's
my
what's
way.
that's good,
Less the young people are talking to themselves. They have all kind of ways that they're talking, thousands of them together, Reddits
That's
and
good.
subreddits and
Right. In terms of war, that the only winners in all of these wars is what Ray McGovern calls the Mickey Mat, the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence,
financial, blah blah,
media,
Yeah, the arms
um,
industry, et cetera, et
academia,
cetera, yeah.
think
and
tank, the Mickey
everything.
Yeah.
Mat.
Hmm.
But Larry and Larry Wilkerson said that they need to get like $50 billion a year. So war is prime as just feeding them. And as you noticed just now, like Trump said, oh, we're not going to give money to Ukraine
Who needs
weapons.
50
I mean,
billion?
all of our when we
Who
say
needs
aid,
50
it's
billion
like
a year?
it's military
Yeah.
aid, and it's all and we make the money.
Yeah.
We're not like giving aid, we're giving ourselves business.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Alana, about how the young people are getting different message, because we had an electrician come in to work on our system. We had a blowout and so on. And before we left, we started getting in a conversation, Daniel and me and him, and by golly, he's an in-betweener. I mean, he really sees the corruption. He sees what's going on, and he's just a regular electrician guy who's
Yeah,
self-taught, that's just doing odd jobs, right? In his 20s. It's
Well,
like
my
it's
son
it's
was
in like
About
60
it's,
and
it's
he's
about
encouraging.
but with
people
abolish
had dinner with the
what
we had dinner with the publisher of the Washington Post. And
Oh,
what was very interesting, and he was it was a group of us, but the publisher was at our table. And it was very interesting because they have, sorry,
What's his name?
she's on mute. Yeah, there you
I
go.
have to look it up. I forgot. But what was interesting was that he said that people like around 30 years old and younger, they listen to YouTube as the news. And they don't listen to any mainstream news source. And they're doing nothing to try and get these people, and it's not just the Washington Post, it's the New York Times. The mainstream media is doing nothing to try and convert these young people. They just
they don't
leave them.
have the right. They don't have the right narrative.
Yeah, yeah.
they love Joe Rogan, which is amazing because younger people, you think, short attention span, and he goes on for like 2 hours, 3 hours. But a lot of young people like Joe
Yeah.
Rogan.
Yeah.
He's pretty
Yeah.
out there.
Well,
But back
you
to the
know,
abolish war theme. We've abolished war within the United States. If a group in Philadelphia bombed San Francisco, California would not bomb Pennsylvania. we would find the bad guys, put them under trial, and do justice to whoever perpetrated the bombing. Do you see what I mean? And why we would do that is because of law. And we do have world law, and the International Criminal Court has condemned Netanyahu. The world law has condemned what Israel is doing. The problem is these courts don't have enforcement.
Right.
Don't have enforcement for any international law because the UN was never set up as a world government with that kind of power. There is the blue helmets that they can send in for peacekeeping, so-called. Sometimes all they can do is watch, as observe. So we have the beginning of a global
and
peace.
we're also
What? We have the beginning of a
they're
global
also
peacekeeping.
they're threatening like the Karim Khan, like the judges in the ICC and the ICJ, and Francesca Albanese, they're threatening anyone who's like trying to hold Israel to account, or the US.
Right, right.
Threatened with destruction. I mean, they're getting death threats.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, this is nothing new. I think
Where's
what's
that coming
shocking
from?
is that it is so public for the first time.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
kinds of tricks have been going on, as you all know about, you know, my experience with the mainstream media going back to the, you know, 1970s and witnessing inside the creation of the totally phony Soviet invasion of Afghanistan that literally set the stage for right now because of the potential that we had at that moment, because of the crisis that occurred at the end of the Vietnam War, to move away from war, to move into negotiation. And the neocons, they came in with their Team B agenda. And Zbigniew Brzezinski got into the White House under President Carter to literally intentionally lure the Soviets into an invasion of Afghanistan to actually trigger exactly what we are now in, a permanent casus belli that would give the neocons endless ability to keep pushing war. In fact, Reagan, when he got in, he created the largest defense budget since World War II based on the Soviets being in Afghanistan, which was caused by what Brzezinski did. So this is my point about the mainstream media and this crisis of, and I'm in having to go back to some of these foundational ideas and give them up. It's not easy. Well, there's a lot of Americans in all kinds of ways who are faced with that very crisis about what the United States stands for real. And these are the kinds of things we've been up against since the 1970s, trying to get that story out.
I think it's out. I think the basic template is pretty well out, Liz. I think there's a success here. The question is, what do we do about the analysis and the knowledge? And when Diane mentions the ICC judges being death threats, and we know there's death threats, lots of people who speak out. People were speaking out against the COVID vaccines. We're getting in a lot of trouble. So this is where we need the military to protect people who are the truth speakers. So there needs to be military protection, in my view. They need special protection, those courts of the ICC and everybody. And then you need two things. The other thing you need, the death threats. Calling the death threats. You need to trace back who's giving the orders for the assassins that want to kill the good people. You see, we got to trace that back too. So I think that if given all the information we have with the internet and the connectivity, I think if we put out a call, somebody somehow put out a call, tell us more about the death threats, what's happening, and we put out a citizens call to like trace this back to the perpetrators. We can't name the perpetrators. We can say neocons, we can say whatever the imperialists are, but we're not saying their names. There's a few who are instigating the violence. Why don't we know their names?
Is that Mr. Global, what Catherine Austin Fitts called?
Yes, and she's not saying names either.
She
Although on
doesn't,
one hand, it's good to look at, huh?
She's not, there's the 20
Yeah, she does. Yeah, yeah.
Soros, she
Unless,
does. Okay,
I
then
don't, last I heard, she wasn't sure, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's what she said. She didn't, so that's why she didn't name names.
well, on
But
one hand, naming the names is important. On
yeah,
another hand, this is a whole structure.
But we don't know them. We know their fronts, but we don't know who's behind
that's right.
the front people, but
Well, who do
we
we
don't
all
know.
think? I think it traces back to like R&R, the Rothschilds and the Rockefeller. It's that nexus
Right.
around a long time, that financial nexus. That's been a strategy for a long time. By the way, in 2 days, I'm going to Oil City in Titusville, where oil was discovered in Western Pennsylvania. I've never been there. And I'm going to go in because Rockefeller did a lot of dirty stuff uh, during that time of the wildcatters getting the oil out of the ground when it was being discovered. He made deals with
Yep.
trains and transport and all kinds of things that led to the rise of Standard Oil and then Bank of America and his whole thing with Rockefeller and Carnegie. I just want to kind of intuitively feel into the energy there. So that's where I'm going to be the next few days.
But Rockefeller is behind everything.
Yeah.
God,
Got to say R and R, Rockefeller
yeah,
and
yeah.
Rothschild.
Well,
Right.
and we're oil drenched. Everything is oil based. I mean, it's there has to be something that we can do to undo all that.
Bobby Kennedy's taking out oil-based food dyes. I mean, that came up.
Yeah, yeah. And the
Hmm.
Top of the bucket
pharmaceuticals
list.
and the fertilizers. I mean, it's endless.
The battle is there.
The Rockefeller
There's several
control.
fronts for this battle.
Yeah, the homeopathy
Well,
kills.
they've had so much money and so much time to pursue their agenda while the rest of us are trying to make a buck.
But that's where retired people come
Oh,
in.
that
That's where we retired people. I mean, there's a lot of retired people that need to be called on who have time and energy, even though I'm working all the time as a volunteer. So we can't go on and on, although we could. And I'd like personally to have as much input as Helen would like to give us now. And I don't know if we have a sense of next steps, but Helen, please maybe wrap it up for us because I got to do a PowerPoint for Liz's program on Wednesday.
I guess I think the one piece of advice I would have is I would say, you know, as a Palestinian American, I have dreamed of a day where there's justice and there's a Truth and Reconciliation Commission a la South Africa. And I think I have given up that, and not given up from a sense of victimhood, but given it up for one possible for us to just not have to resolve this conflict and there be a moment where we just transcend and the Palestinian people and the Israeli people decide they're not going to let their leaders drive the train anymore and get out of this situation that we're in, and then you don't get stuck in the muck of blaming and trying to force people to see a lot of shocking truths. I think we can just move on with our lives and create a better world. And that's what I hope for everybody, just to get on with having a wonderful life.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you 100%, Helen. I really do. 100%.
Yeah, those are words of wisdom. Thank you, Helen, so much.
I'm wondering if the Palestinian groups that Helen mentioned, and then all the Jews for Peace groups that Diane mentioned. I just wonder, thinking ahead, if we could bring some people from these groups into a dialogue with us. Are they in sufficient dialogue now? Can we assist with enhancing just what Helen said with a future way forward that the people can have clarity about?
I'd like to talk about that off record, off the recording.
Okay, but it's a possibility to consider, you're saying. Helen, where do you see the need for increased dialogue and where do you see possibilities?
I think there are more and more groups, and I think it's actually just giving them airtime. And from what I'm hearing from this conversation, I would just suggest you reach out to Combatants for Peace and maybe have them on your show.
Yes, love to. Everybody knows what they are, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Shall we go ahead with Helen's suggestion? And do you know their leadership, Helen? I don't know anybody in the leadership. I mean, if we're gonna agree
I don't know them personally.
Yeah.
But I could probably get you a name and an email ad. There are two documentaries made about the group, and I know it's easy to get a hold of the producers of the movie, and they know, of course, the participants.
Well, we're just meeting you for the first time, except for Ginger being your friend. Is that too much to put on you that you find somebody like that for us?
Sure, I can do that.
Oh, thanks, Helen. Everybody agree that
What
that
about the ones that
program?
made the documentary? They might be interesting to talk to.
Yeah,
Yes.
You know, how, I mean, to advance new ideas for the documentary. I think that's a step up for getting the message
Yeah.
out.
yeah, yeah. So that would be wonderful, Helen. And Diane, you mentioned Land for the People, which I had heard of, but you mentioned that earlier in our conversation. Is that what it's called?
Land for All. If you just look on their website, they
No,
have
no, no, I'm not
they have a
interested.
lot of
I think it's a good one to reach out to for a speaker.
okay.
So if you might do that, that would be wonderful.
Okay.
Do you have just a paragraph about your group that I could forward in an email when I reach out to these people?
We have bios from all of us. Now, yeah, we did. Remember, I mean, we've been doing this 3 years, I think. We did come up with something.
If you could send me a one paragraph, here's the new view, and this is what we talk about, and
Yeah.
it'd be great.
What I might do is I'll fish it out and send it to our new view team to see if it's okay or if you want to make any changes. Because that was put together a little while ago. Okay, before I send it to Helen, I'd like kind of a review and approval of that mission. Okay.
Okay, sounds great.
All right, I guess we've done it. Thank you,
We
Helen.
did it.
You wanna close this out, Ginger?
I don't know how to close out. All we
Just
can say is that thank you so much, Helen, for sharing with us. And I feel like this has really been an enlightening and interesting conversation. I'm impressed. I always seem to be impressed with the grasp of history that Liz has. It's just always amazing to me. And the comprehensive view and beautiful inspirational message that Helen is sharing. So
Yes.
thank you so much. And I guess to whoever is watching, we'll see you next week on the new.
Thank